All right, so proceed. Uh, so I want you to like, I really want a complete understanding of. For so long, all I did was formulate opinion based on stuff that I read. I completely did not write, and I completely did not like establish something. But for me, anything is a potential something. I don't fucking care. It doesn't matter. Whatever you give me, I always found a way to kind of like build an idea around it and make it into like a self-sustaining business in my head. Naturally, I failed a lot in that term, in those like senses. But so, by 2018, I started reading more and writing more, and I started experimenting more with thoughts and with like different perspectives on life. And by 2020, I started engaging more with the things that I've been reading about and learning and actually talking to people about it. And at one point, a lot of people became like very much distant, as in, like, what the fuck are you doing, man? We just want to chill. We want to hang out. Leave us alone. And by 2021, end of it, I had kind of like reached a threshold when it came to my programming journey, coding journey. I reached a plateau where I completely looked at myself and I was like, hey, man, I don't know what you're doing, but it clearly seems you're clueless. And so going back to the video that I started 2 videos ago about like the initiation of the journey, by mid 2000, I think 21, I had started reading more about like objects, functions, about data and how basically programs use data, transfer data. And I was scouring resources. I was like, I would literally read websites over and over and over again. Like, I knew myself that the first thing I need to do was expose myself to the market. The first thing I needed to do was literally just start having these websites in my head, like, what are these doing and what are these talking about and what are the basics that I should be knowing, what are the like what is the base understanding of any form of conversation when it comes to these kinds of things. Because like I started noticing that there's terminologies that I have no fucking idea. There are words they use. There are thought processes. There's like mindsets. There's a whole lot of like they started discussing things that I for myself never kind of like had in my head because everything I interacted with was direct reality, and it was more like people. And again, like I was probably like disillusioned when it came to like how I was interacting with the world as well. It kind of seems the same for now. Like my dad is always trying to tell me, learn from your experience. Like it literally is always the case. But that's always the case with me. But like it's literally always the case. That kind of sounded the same. But there's always this direct feedback that I'm looking for whenever I'm doing something when it comes to like people because I developed an anxiety because I completely failed them. And the reason I started learning basically programming, one of the reasons I started learning programming was like, you know, if I can't like actually interact with people, at the very least, I can interact with computers. And if I'm able to, because programming is very tricky and you cannot like, even one spelling error would like screw the entire fucking program that you're writing or code that you're writing. So you have to be very like crystal clear and articulate to tell the computer what you want to do, what you want it to do in order for the computer to kind of like do what you want and do it the way you want it. And that way, if I'm able to articulate myself to a computer, then I'll be able to articulate myself to people. Ah, that's so off, by the way. Like, don't do that. When you're articulating yourself to people, they take offense very fast. Fragile egos. I remember I probably used to be that way at one point where people were trying to explain something to me and I was like set in what I understood and then it becomes frustrating when I'm not really understanding or I'm just like looking at them as like, who do you think you are? And all that kind of like good stuff. But anyways, so a few lectures I still remember till now that these are the lectures that kind of like opened my mind to like different things. And then from there, whatever, because like I'd read the same website once, twice, 3 times. I remember I'd take courses and like slowly, gradually, like learning more, but it's kind of felt like I was absent-minded while I was like learning, while I was coding. It was like I knew what I was doing when I was looking at the page, but the minute I look somewhere else, it's like it's gone. And like the whole part of my mind that looks at the computer in a way where I'm interacting with it instead of just Googling stuff. Like that was a completely different shift in my reality. And I'm speaking about it right now, it's making it more real. So it's just like I started as as a rule of thumb, I think by 2018 I was like, what if Tariq, you're not as smart as you think you are? And for the longest time, a lot of people kept saying, like, they would say that I'm smart, or they would say that, like, they like the way I think. But I always looked at myself and I was like, but I'm not succeeding. If I'm not succeeding, then maybe I'm under the illusion that I'm smart, or maybe I'm smart enough, or and that's basically something that happens most of the time because, like, ultimately, kind of like everyone says that you're the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room. But sometimes you kind of surround yourself by people that are not as smart as you or that are basically looking up to you so you can feel good or just like excited to have you around. So you kind of like forget that the whole point of actually doing something is because you want to level up. And it's funny because not a lot of people have that in their head. Most people just want to hustle. They want to like kind of create their life the way they want to like live it. But so I think by 2018, I looked at myself and I actually wrote it down. I was like, Tariq. And I wrote down, like, with a capital letter, my name. What if you're not as smart as you think you are? And if you were to ask yourself, like, how could I actually get smarter? Or if this was me and whatever it is that even though I'm smarter than, let's say, I'm smart enough to understand what they're talking about, maybe I'm smart enough to be an intermediate person in this field, but I don't really know what a professional would think. And that's like a very beautiful separation because like a lot of times you're just like good enough as a beginner because to become good enough, it's literally like I think 20 to 30 out to 50 hours of practice of everything. And then you're like decent enough for you to like know fundamentals and foundations. But then the more you experiment with them, you kind of have to like push until you break into like a certain level, which what people call intermediate. And intermediate is into the interactivity. That's when you start becoming more creative in what you're doing. And that's where slowly, slowly you start becoming the person that is adding more things to the field as a professional instead of just absorbing what the field has to offer. And I think that's the one of the few times where I actually looked at myself and I was like, okay, Tariq, but you might actually not be smart. You might be like a guy that's convinced himself that he's smart based on just maybe uh, a few people that remember you or just a few friends of yours that you were different or something like this. I'm trying to like be coy and not actually be an asshole in how I say things because like there are a lot of people around me that are just brilliant, and I probably like can't explain to them why I think they're brilliant, and they probably can't explain to me why they think I'm smart. But so when I approach things as if I'm not smart, so I realize, and okay, there's something written on this paper, and the first thing I go like, I understand it. But then when I turn my face around, I don't understand it anymore. So I started doing the back and forth where like, okay, I turn my face around. The next day I go like, oh, this paper, I don't remember anything. So I read it again and I read it again and I read it again on the first, second, third, fourth time. And eventually I started getting it. And when I started getting it, I started looking in my head and going like, okay, so if I was smart, I would probably understand it from the first time. So like the goal is for me to understand it from the third time instead of the fifth time. And then from there, like it became a pattern where every single time I don't understand something, I kind of like put it somewhere where I come back to it again. And by the second time and the third time, I kind of established it properly in my head. And from there, I started kind of like evolving how my train of thought operates towards, especially towards things, because like like, to build a startup, there's a whole lot that you have to learn. And keep in mind, I've always been building startups, but I failed in every single one of them. And most of the time I failed simply because like I'm competing with something that's unstable and I'm unstable. So just like being able to survive the waves is different than being able to kind of like anchor yourself on land and build an island or build a house on an island. There's a big difference between like not dying and actually like thriving. And amazing. Oof, lots of memories, dude. Lots of memories. But to come back to it, basically, I started understanding better how I would be able to like learn things differently, how I would be able to establish things differently, how I would be able to slowly just comprehend the things that might be missing. Because ultimately, and I like recently like looked at it, but I realized like it's most of the times we fail, it's not because of the things that we don't have on our plate. It's more the things that we have on our plate that are kind of like not necessarily the best of tools. And it's literally like you can use a hammer to like remove a screw, but it's not the best way to remove a screw. And there's a high chance you're gonna like destroy a whole lot of stuff in the process. So there's a lot of yourself that kind of has to disintegrate into the abyss in order for new things to kind of like come out of it. Because a tree, uh, the life cycle of a tree in a forest is basically the bigger tree dies, and then the smaller trees, shrubs grow. And then as they grow, they are eaten and they are broken and they are being basically all kinds of stuff. And then one of them kind of like a few of them succeed. And then from the shade of all these like newborn trees, the single one that will reach all the way to the sky will just grow and like push them all to the side. And you kind of have to allow that cycle to happen in your head because like anytime you have an idea, you have to want it to die at one point because the minute it dies, like one, two, three, four ideas come out of it. And then eventually all of them combine into this big concept that you call like my life's goal or purpose or plan. And that's when things become interesting. Or that's when things reveal why they were interesting, I guess. Yep. And it's a video.